Hi, welcome back to my Florida Baker Act educational series videos. I sure hope that you are learning through the information that I am providing, and I really appreciate you continuing to watch. In the last video, I started sharing insight about getting discharged once somebody has been Baker Acted. In this video, I am going to talk about the previously mentioned very important tools. These tools are often misunderstood and or misrepresented. They are the writ and the request for discharge. In my opinion, this is by far the most important information in this series. This is the meat and potatoes. You will find links below where you can download the actual forms that should be used. Once a person is admitted under the Baker Act, the facility takes full control of the situation. In reputable hands, this is not an issue because the facility will have your best interest in mind. We will talk about facilities and information about them in an upcoming video. So if the receiving facility has a questionable reputation, the process is adversarial and purposefully made confusing. So let's get to work on becoming more empowered with more information. The writ of habeas corpus, which actually means produce the body. This is used under the Baker Act when a person wants to be discharged. By filing a writ, the person is demanding that the facility provide just cause for the patient to continue to be retained under the Baker Act. The question: what is the difference between voluntary and involuntary status? The short answer is that involuntary means that the person is being held against their will. And the voluntary status means that the person is willingly at the facility. So here's a question for you. What do you think is the benefit of a person signing voluntary, especially on the third day of a Baker Act? So please share your comments below. I would love to hear from you. Here are my thoughts based on my observations and my experience. One benefit is that if the 72 hours expires and the person has not been discharged, then that means that the facility is out of compliance. And by having the patient sign the voluntary, that brings them back into compliance. Otherwise, the patient has to be released. Another benefit is, apparently, what I learned is that the insurance companies do not reimburse for the day of discharge. Therefore, getting the patient to sign voluntary on day 3 with a promise to be discharged on day 4 means that the facility gets reimbursed for the full 3 days. And most importantly, having a person sign voluntary gives the facility more time to manipulate the patient's length of stay. This is how things can get confusing. And the opportunity to take advantage of the situation presents itself. If a patient signs voluntary, then decides that they are ready to leave the facility, a request for discharge form should be provided. When a patient fills this out, per the Baker Act statute, they must be released within 24 hours, unless the patient rescinds the request or the patient is transferred back to involuntary status. When someone fills this out, they are supposed to be seen by a physician or a psychiatrist within 24 hours, and that is to be assessed for involuntary status, which requires a petition to be filed. However, Florida statute states that if more time is needed for discharge planning, the time period may be extended, but discharge must happen within 3 days. This is the caveat that the facility can use to manipulate the length of stay for a voluntary patient. Under the 72-hour Baker Act, additional time for discharge planning is not stipulated. So, if the patient signs voluntary, this lifts the concrete legal 72-hour release requirement. Now, remember, the facility or the psychiatrist has to authorize a discharge. Under voluntary status, the patient is at the mercy of the facility or the psychiatrist, and the facility has time on their side. For example, if a patient on Baker Act involuntary status signs voluntary on the 3rd day and is not discharged on the 4th day as promised, then the patient can file a request for discharge on that 4th day. Now, the facility does not have to respond until the 5th day, 24 hours later. And it is then possible for the facility to transfer the patient back to involuntary status, which basically restarts the 72 hours. So, I know this is a lot of information. So let me use a real-time scenario and show you, hopefully in a chart that will be helpful. Okay, let's say a person is admitted under a Baker Act on a Saturday with an admission time of noon. And this is when we are going to start the 72 hours. So basically by noon on Tuesday, the person is told that they can be discharged on Wednesday if they sign voluntary, and they do. So then on Wednesday, the person is told that there are still some concerns and they need to stay a little longer, or that the psychiatrist isn't available, or they're given some other elusive reason for them not to be discharged on that day. So if the patient then decides to fill out a request for discharge, the facility has until Thursday, as represented on the chart, to respond to the individual. Remember, this is also only if the person understands their rights and is able to implement them in these timeframes. So, on Thursday, the facility then has the option to transfer the patient back to involuntary status, which then restarts the 72-hour clock. The petition will be filled out that day, and now the patient is facing a stay until Monday because the 72 hours will expire over the weekend. And remember, I've said before, if the 72 hours expires over a weekend or a holiday, then the facility is not held liable for holding the patient for longer than the 72 hours. So that's how a 72-hour Baker Act turns into a 9-day stay. So, okay, let's say that even if the patient fills out a writ, which would be their next option, it would be filed with the petition, and then the public defender would see the patient on Friday. It is likely that the public defender would not have adequate time to file the petition to get the person discharged on that Friday. Therefore, the patient is still looking at a Monday discharge, turning a 72-hour Baker Act into a 9-day stay. Now, let's go back to the writ of habeas corpus. When a person is Baker Acted, they have the right to fill out a writ of habeas corpus at any time. They do not have to wait for the petition to be filed. Additionally, it states in the Florida Baker Act statute that a family member or a friend can fill out the writ on behalf of the patient. This is what parents can do on behalf of their child that has been Baker acted. And then I'll discuss this some more in the next video as well. When a writ is filled out, it must be filed as soon as possible. Once the writ is filed, which is done electronically, the public defender's office is notified immediately, and the patient will be seen by the public defender within 24 hours. Now let's go over 2 more scenarios. Okay, so in this scenario again, a patient is Baker acted on Saturday and they have the admission time of noon, and they're thinking that they're going to get discharged on Tuesday. So when Tuesday comes around, the patient declines to sign the voluntary, and now they learn that the petition is going to get filed. So they've educated themselves and they know that they can file a writ, and they do so on that Tuesday. So then what happens is that the patient will be seen by the public defender on Wednesday. Now, it is very likely that the public defender will be able to file the petition on that Wednesday and then get the person discharged by court order on that Wednesday evening or by the next morning on Thursday. Now, in this last scenario and the best case scenario, let's go through it again. The person is Baker acted on Saturday with the admission time of noon, but that really doesn't matter at this point. If a writ is filed anytime on Saturday or Sunday morning, likely anytime on Sunday, but just to be safe by Sunday morning, the person will be seen by the public defender on Monday. And then the public defender will be able to file a petition for discharge, very likely by the close of business on Monday. So in this scenario, it is very likely that the person will be discharged by court order Monday evening or no later than Tuesday morning. This is how a person gets discharged by the 72 hour. If a person waits for the 72 hours to expire and then learns that a petition for involuntary placement is going to be filed, it is still a better choice to fill out a writ to facilitate the discharge on the 4th day, especially depending on their insurance coverage, rather than signing voluntary, even if a staff member, no matter who the staff member is, makes a statement that the person will be discharged the following day. Typically, the petition would be filed and the person could very possibly be discharged on the following day, but that is dependent on the insurance coverage. For example, Florida Blue New Directions authorizes 3 days for the Baker Act, and then they require justification for additional days. Now, if you have 3 days of coverage, you are most likely going to be discharged on the 4th day, whether you are told this or not. Most likely not. It is my recommendation that signing voluntary after being Baker acted is not in the patient's best interest, regardless of the receiving facility that they are at. If a person is in need of additional treatment, they can receive that treatment from outpatient providers. Now, if the patient remains a threat to themselves or to others, then allow the court to make the decision whether or not their freedoms should continue to be restricted. Also, even a person that in a severe manic episode can be stabilized within 72 hours. So once again, thank you for watching this video, and please share this video with your friends and family and help me to get this information out there so that we can hopefully hold these facilities accountable and people can get the treatment that they deserve and that they need.